He hit 154 batters in his career. He drilled them in the ribs. He sent them diving into the dirt. He knocked them off the plate so hard that some of them never fully felt comfortable in the batter's box again. And yet, when the final out of the game was recorded and the dugouts emptied, the greatest hitters who ever lived would seek this man out just to shake his hand. Some of them called him a friend. Some of them called him a legend. And the one man who knew him best, the quiet genius who shared a locker room and a revolution with him for over a decade, Sandy Koufax, called him something even more powerful than that. He called him the reason any of it was even possible. This is the story of Don Drysdale, Big D, the enforcer, the man who made it very clear every single time he stepped onto that mound that half of the plate belonged to him and the other half only existed because he allowed it. He was the most feared pitcher of his generation, and somehow, impossibly, he was also one of the most beloved figures the game has ever produced. But here is what makes this story so fascinating. The love did not come from his teammates. It did not come from journalists or fans or people who only saw him from a distance. The love came from the hitters, the men he terrorized, the men he knocked down and brushed back and sent limping back to the dugout with bruised forearms and wounded pride. The greatest players of the 20th century looked at Don Drysdale and saw something that made them respect him on a level that went far beyond baseball. Sandy Koufax spent decades reflecting on what made Drysdale so special. And through those reflections, the truth becomes clear. Drysdale was not mean because he was a bad person. He was mean because he cared more about protecting his teammates than he cared about being liked. And the hitters, the real ones, the elite ones, understood that immediately. They understood it because they were built the same way. They knew the difference between a man playing a role and a man living by a code. And every time Drysdale stepped on that mound, you could feel the code coming off him like heat off asphalt in August. Think about what it must have felt like to stand in that batter's box and look out at him. 6'5", 220 pounds. That sidearm delivery already loaded, the ball hidden behind his hip until the last possible moment. His eyes locked onto you like he had been waiting for this at-bat specifically and had already decided how it was going to end. There was no warmth in that stare. There was no diplomacy. There was just pure, undiluted competitive will pointing directly at your chest. Most hitters wanted no part of it. The great ones stepped in anyway. And those were the men who came to love him. And the thing about his delivery that made it especially brutal for right-handed hitters was the angle. When Drysdale released the ball from that sidearm slot, it looked like it was coming from the direction of third base. It looked like it was coming from somewhere that a baseball had no business coming from. The ball started behind you and tracked toward you at speeds your eyes and brain were not designed to process from that direction. His two-seam sinker would start at your hip and break toward your hands. You would commit to the swing before you understood where the ball was actually going to end up. And by then, it was too late. You were either jamming yourself on a pitch that dove inside, or you were ducking out of the way of something that was going to hit you. There was no comfortable middle ground against Don Drysdale. There was only the choice you made and the consequence that followed. Before we get into the players who respected him most, you need to understand where this all came from. Because Drysdale did not invent his philosophy on his own. There was a teacher. There was a moment when a young pitcher from Van Nuys, California, had the entire frame of his professional life shifted by a few sentences from a veteran who had seen everything the game could throw at him and survived all of it. Both Koufax and Drysdale were mentored by a veteran pitcher named Sal Maglie. They called him the barber because of the way he shaved the corners of the strike zone and the edges of a hitter's chin with equal precision. Maglie joined the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1956 and immediately became the most important teacher either young pitcher would ever have. Maglie's entire philosophy was built on one idea: instill fear. Make the hitter feel vulnerable. Make him know that the plate is contested territory and that stepping into the box without respect would cost him something. Maglie had walked that road himself. He had been the intimidating presence on the mound for other teams. He had felt what it meant to own the inside corner and use it as a weapon. And now he was passing that knowledge down to two young men who would take it further than he ever did. Koufax took Maglie's lessons and applied them with surgical precision, using the brushback pitch to set up his devastating curveball. It was a setup tool for him, a way of creating doubt before delivering the knockout. But Drysdale took those same lessons and built something bigger out of them. He did not use the inside pitch as a setup. He used it as a statement. He absorbed every single word Maglie said and turned them into a personal code that governed every inning he ever pitched. Half the plate is mine. If you hit one of my guys, I will hit two of yours. Not one, two. That was Drysdale's rule, and he never broke it once in his entire career. Koufax later said this 2-for-1 policy was not mindless violence. It was a calculated strategy. It was the most efficient form of protection a pitcher could offer his teammates. And it worked in ways that went far beyond any single game or any single at-bat. The policy shaped the entire way opposing teams approached the Dodgers. Managers sat in their dugouts and did the math. Throwing at a Dodger hitter meant Drysdale was coming for two of their guys. Was it worth it? Almost always, the answer was no. When Koufax was on the mound, looking like a surgeon dissecting a lineup with mathematical precision, it was partly because every opposing pitcher in the league knew what would happen if they threw at him. Nobody wanted to wake up Drysdale. The enforcer made the artist possible. That is the thing people miss when they look at this story from the outside. They see Koufax as the brilliant one and Drysdale as the rough one, but that is only the surface. Underneath it, those two roles were completely dependent on each other. You could not have one without the other. Koufax's elegance existed inside a frame that Drysdale built with intimidation and loyalty and sheer unstoppable force of will. And the partnership went beyond the mound. Before games they were scheduled to start, both men refused to shave. It was their ritual, their armor. A black circle of stubble that appeared on both their faces on game days, a shared superstition that said, "Today is different. Today, we are at war." Koufax described it as mentally putting on the armor before the battle. It was a small thing, but it meant something. It said that these two men, as different as they appeared to the outside world, were operating from the same place on the days that mattered most. Together, from 1959 to 1966, these two men accounted for 40% of the Dodgers' wins. They led the franchise to 3 World Series titles. Drysdale averaged nearly 300 innings per season during that stretch, leading all of Major League Baseball from 1962 to 1965, with over 1,200 innings pitched in those 4 years alone. He was not just good, he was relentless. He was available. He was indestructible. While Koufax was quietly managing a left arm that was being destroyed by traumatic arthritis, soaking it in ice and rubbing it down with treatments just to make his next start, Drysdale was eating up innings in a way that covered for the entire pitching staff. He did not log those numbers for personal glory. He did it because the team needed him to do it. And Don Drysdale did not know how to say no when his team needed something. And the hitters on the other side of all those innings? They noticed. They respected it. They loved it, even when it put them in the dirt. Now let us talk about the men who felt it most. We are going to go through them in a specific order, starting with the one who perhaps had the most complicated relationship with Drysdale's style of pitching, and working our way to the man whose rivalry with Big D became one of the defining stories of an entire decade. Number 4. Roberto Clemente. Roberto Clemente was one of the most gifted pure hitters the game has ever seen. His hand-eye coordination was supernatural. His athleticism was a work of art. He moved in the outfield like the game had been invented specifically for him. Like every ball hit in his direction was just another opportunity to remind everyone watching that they were looking at something they would never see again. At the plate, he was equally extraordinary. He could hit pitches that had no business being hit. He had a swing that covered every inch of the zone and parts of the zone that were not supposed to exist. He was a man who valued what he called pure competition. Old school, honest, no tricks, no excuses. He wanted to beat you at your best. He wanted you to beat him at yours. There was a pride in that philosophy that ran all the way through everything Clemente did on a baseball field. He was not interested in shortcuts. He was not interested in anything that was not earned the hard way. He wanted every win to mean something and every loss to teach him something. That was the standard he held himself to, and it was the standard he held everyone else to as well. And Don Drysdale gave him fits. The reason was mechanical. Drysdale threw from a sidearm slot, a delivery that made the ball appear to originate from the direction of third base. For right-handed hitters, this angle was deeply unsettling. The ball seemed to come from behind them, and the movement on his sinker made it dive in unexpected directions at the last moment. Clemente, as brilliant as he was, found this delivery genuinely difficult to pick up. It did not match his rhythms. It disrupted his timing in ways that other pitchers simply could not. Other pitchers threw hard, and Clemente adjusted. Other pitchers threw breaking balls, and Clemente adjusted. But that sidearm slot, that angle that looked like it was coming from completely the wrong place, that was something even his extraordinary eyes could not fully solve. And for a man as proud of his hitting ability as Clemente was, that inability to solve Drysdale was its own kind of compelling challenge. But here is what made Clemente love the man anyway. Drysdale never made excuses. Not once. Not when his arm was sore. Not when the opposition was hot and the game was slipping away. Not when his body was telling him to stop and his competitive spirit was telling him to keep going. Koufax noted that Clemente watched Drysdale pitch through physical ailments that would have sent other pitchers to the disabled list. He watched him take the ball every fourth day, arm aching or not, hip sore or not, and throw 300 innings a year without complaint. In a 1965 game where Koufax struck out 15 batters, one of the most dominant individual performances in baseball history, Clemente watched from the opposing dugout as Drysdale sat in the Dodgers dugout, ready to enter the game at any moment, matching his partner's intensity even from the bench. He was not sulking because he was not pitching that day. He was locked in. He was present. He was ready. That is who Don Drysdale was. That selflessness, that quiet readiness to sacrifice personal glory for the team, was exactly the kind of thing Clemente built his own career around. He recognized a kindred spirit. He recognized a man who played the game the right way, even if that way involved delivering a fastball at the level of your belt buckle the moment you got comfortable. Clemente could respect a man who hurt him on the field, if that man was hurting him for the right reasons. And Drysdale's reasons were always the right reasons. His team, his teammates, the people he had promised to protect when he took the ball and walked to that mound. Clemente admired the work ethic. He admired the refusal to take shortcuts. He admired the fact that Drysdale showed up and competed with everything he had, every single time, no matter what it cost him. Number 3, Frank Robinson. If Roberto Clemente admired Drysdale's work ethic, Frank Robinson admired something even more primal. He admired Drysdale's honesty. Frank Robinson was one of the most competitive, uncompromising human beings to ever put on a baseball uniform. He did not tolerate weakness. He did not tolerate deception. He did not respect pitchers who hid behind trickery or who smiled at you before trying to sneak something past you. He wanted to know what he was dealing with. He wanted the fight to be out in the open. Robinson had spent his entire career forcing people to take him seriously, fighting for every inch of the respect he deserved, earning his status through a brand of aggressive, take-no-prisoners play that made opponents uncomfortable and fans electric. He understood the game as a confrontation, as a series of individual battles inside a larger war. And he wanted every one of those battles to be fought honestly. Don Drysdale never hid a single thing. Koufax recalled how Drysdale would stand on that mound and glare at Robinson. Not a subtle glare, not a polite, competitive stare, a full, locked-in, unwavering stare that communicated one message with perfect clarity. I see you, I know exactly what you are capable of, and I am still coming right at you. There was no pretense. There was no diplomacy. Drysdale told you exactly what he was about to do and then dared you to stop him. He was not trying to trick you. He was not trying to sneak up on you. He was standing right in front of you and announcing his intentions like a man who had nothing to hide and nothing to fear. Robinson called him bad to the bone, and he meant it as the highest possible compliment. To Robinson, that transparency was a form of respect. Drysdale was essentially saying that you are dangerous enough that I need to dominate you psychologically before I even throw the first pitch. He was acknowledging the threat by going to war with it immediately. And Robinson, who spent his entire career demanding that kind of honest competition, responded to it with genuine admiration. He could feel the respect in the aggression. He could feel the acknowledgement in the confrontation. Drysdale was not treating him like someone who could be fooled or distracted. He was treating him like the dangerous, elite competitor he was. Koufax noted that the two of them shared something he could only describe as gamesmanship. It was not hatred. It was not animosity. It was the kind of intense professional rivalry that only exists between two people who understand each other's greatness and refuse to give an inch because they refuse to insult the other's ability by not trying their absolute hardest. Every time Robinson stepped in against Drysdale, both men were operating at the very top of their capabilities, and both men knew it, and both men loved it. Frank Robinson loved Don Drysdale because Drysdale never blinked. And Frank Robinson never blinked either. They understood each other completely. Number 2, Hank Aaron. Now we arrive at perhaps the most analytically interesting relationship in this entire story. Hank Aaron was the most disciplined hitter in the history of the sport. His ability to read pitchers, to identify patterns, to understand what a pitcher was trying to do, and systematically exploit every weakness in their approach was something that went beyond talent into the realm of genius. Aaron did not hit home runs because he was the strongest man in the room. He hit home runs because he understood pitching at a level that most hitters only dream about. He cataloged every pitcher he ever faced. He knew their tendencies. He knew their tells. He knew what they were going to throw before they threw it. And Hank Aaron's assessment of Don Drysdale was not emotional. It was not about toughness or gamesmanship or competitive fire. It was about efficiency. Aaron observed that Drysdale's greatest weapon was his refusal to give in. Koufax recalled Aaron's famous observation. Drysdale did not want to hit you, but he would let you know the plate belonged to him. Think about what that means from a hitter's perspective. Aaron was saying that Drysdale was so efficient, so committed to getting outs by any means necessary, that he would rather hit a batter and lose a base runner than waste 3 or 4 pitches on a careful, cautious walk. The hit batter was faster. The hit batter was more direct. And it sent a message that 4 balls never could. It told every hitter watching from the dugout exactly what they were about to walk into when their turn came. There was no wasted motion with Drysdale. No extra pitches. No courtesy offerings on the corner that were never intended to get swung at. Every pitch he threw was intended to do something specific. And if hitting you in the arm was the most efficient way to execute his game plan on a given at-bat, he was prepared to do exactly that and move on to the next hitter without a second thought. To a man like Aaron, who valued intelligence and economy above almost everything else, this was not cruelty. It was craft. Aaron also respected the way Drysdale used his sinker. The pitch moved late, dove in on right-handed hitters, and some around the league suspected it was doctored with saliva or another substance to create even more unpredictable movement. Koufax spoke about this openly. Whether the pitch was doctored or not, the effect was the same. Aaron and every other hitter in the National League could never fully commit to their swing because the ball might end up somewhere completely different from where it started. And for a hitter who built his entire game on reading the ball out of the hand and committing to the swing at exactly the right moment, that unpredictability was its own kind of torment. For a hitter built on discipline and pattern recognition, this was maddening. But Aaron respected it. He respected the intelligence behind it. He respected the fact that Drysdale was not just throwing the ball hard. He was thinking 3 pitches ahead, building a trap, reducing the hitter's options one by one until there was nowhere left to go. That was not the approach of a bully. That was the approach of a strategist. And Aaron, who was himself one of the greatest strategists to ever stand in a batter's box, recognized the quality of the mind he was dealing with every time he stepped in against Drysdale. That kind of efficiency, that level of strategic thinking on the mound, was something Aaron could appreciate because it mirrored his own approach at the plate. They were 2 different types of genius competing against each other, and the respect that grew from that competition was enormous. Number 1, Willie Mays. And now we arrive at the greatest rivalry. The relationship that Koufax returns to most often when he talked about Drysdale. The relationship that, perhaps more than any other, defines what Big D meant to the game and to the people who played it at its highest level. Willie Mays called Don Drysdale the most formidable pitcher he ever saw. Let that sit for a moment. Willie Mays faced every great pitcher of the 1950s and 1960s. He faced Bob Gibson, whose 1968 season produced an earned run average of 1.12, one of the most dominant individual pitching performances in the history of the sport. He faced Sandy Koufax himself, one of the most unhittable pitchers in baseball history, a man who in his final 5 seasons before arthritis forced him into retirement, posted numbers that still seem almost impossible when you look at them today. And he chose Don Drysdale as the most formidable of all of them. That is not a small thing. That is Willie Mays, the greatest all-around player the game has ever seen, making a definitive statement about the man who pushed him to his limits more than anyone else in his career. The story begins in 1956, at the Polo Grounds. Drysdale was a rookie. Mays was already a legend, already the player that every pitcher in the league knew they had to solve if they wanted to win. He was the player managers built their entire pitching strategies around. He was the player scouts wrote scouting reports about that all said the same thing. There is no hole. There is no weakness. You just have to survive him. In the first inning of that game, a young Drysdale delivered a pitch and Mays hit it out of the park. Just like that. A reminder of exactly who he was dealing with. A rookie learning his lesson from the most dangerous teacher in the National League. When Mays came back to the plate in the 4th inning, Drysdale threw 2 consecutive knockdown pitches. Not 1, 2, back to back. He sent the most dangerous hitter in the game diving into the dirt twice in a row. A lesser pitcher might have walked Mays after the home run. A lesser pitcher might have tried to nibble at the edges of the zone, hoping to get lucky. Drysdale came right back at him because that was the only way Don Drysdale knew how to compete. And Mays eventually singled. But here is the part that reveals everything about this story. Far from holding a grudge, far from walking away from that at bat with anger or resentment, Mays came away with something closer to delight. He looked at those 2 knockdown pitches, and he understood them perfectly. Drysdale was not trying to hurt him. Drysdale was not acting out of frustration over the home run, not trying to retaliate or punish Mays for making him look bad. He was saying something else entirely. He was saying that he respected Mays' power so much that he had to make him think about something other than swinging the bat. It was a professional acknowledgement of greatness, delivered at 90+ miles per hour, directly at a man's chin. And Mays responded the way Mays always responded to a worthy opponent. He stole second base on the very next pitch. Koufax spoke about the warrior respect between these 2 icons repeatedly over the years. He described it as a dialogue. Drysdale knocking Mays down was one line of the conversation. Mays stealing second base was the reply. Neither one of them was backing down. Neither one of them was backing away. They were 2 athletes operating at the absolute peak of their abilities, competing on a level that most people watching could not fully comprehend. And they loved every second of it. This is what it looked like when greatness met greatness, and both sides refused to surrender. This is what the game looked like at its highest and most beautiful level. Mays once said, with complete sincerity, that no one was meaner than Drysdale. And then he called him the most formidable pitcher he ever saw. Those 2 sentences, sitting right next to each other, tell you everything you need to know about what made Don Drysdale one of the most beloved figures in baseball history. The meanness and the love were not opposites. They were the same thing. And Drysdale was not just loved by the hitters. He was understood and respected by the other pitchers who operated on the same level of controlled aggression. Bob Gibson of the St. Louis Cardinals was the clearest mirror Drysdale had in the entire National League. They were cut from the same cloth. Both fiercely independent, both hating to lose more than they loved to win, both viewing the mound as their personal property that every hitter had to pay a toll to enter. Gibson once said that Drysdale was one of the few pitchers who truly understood the necessity of being mean on the mound. Not the performance of being mean, not the reputation of being mean, the actual necessity of it. The fact that without that psychological edge, without that ownership of the inside corner, a pitcher was simply giving hitters one less thing to think about. And any hitter who did not have to think about self-preservation was a hitter who was freed up to think entirely about destroying your baseball. Gibson understood this. Drysdale lived it. In 1968, while Gibson was posting his historic earned run average of 1.12, Drysdale was right alongside him in the National League conversation, setting a record of 58 and 2/3 consecutive scoreless innings. Two mean men at the very top of their craft, pushing each other to heights that the game had never seen before. This is what Koufax spent decades trying to explain to people who only saw the surface of what Drysdale was. Off the field, Big D was a great all-around guy. He was charming, witty, and had a storytelling ability that made him a favorite at every event he attended, from banquet halls to presidential receptions. Ronald Reagan was an admirer. The Bat Boys at Dodger Stadium were admirers. He was the same man who would knock you down in the first inning and then buy you a drink after the game, and mean both of those things equally. Vin Scully, the voice of the Dodgers, who broadcast every great moment of Drysdale's career, including his record 60 and 2/3 consecutive scoreless innings in 1968, said that no one he ever broadcast understood the heart of Don Drysdale the way Koufax did. And Koufax also understood the labor pioneer that Drysdale was. Before the 1966 season, the two of them made a decision that shook the entire foundation of professional baseball. At the suggestion of Drysdale's wife Ginger, they chose to negotiate their contracts together as a single unit. They hired an agent, which in 1966 was an open act of rebellion against the baseball establishment. They asked for a combined 3-year, $1 million deal, which the Dodgers front office treated like an insult. The general manager at the time had a strategy. He would call Drysdale and tell him Koufax had already agreed to a lower number. Then he would call Koufax and tell him Drysdale had already signed off on a smaller deal. It was a classic divide-and-conquer move, and it had worked on players for decades. But this time, the two men compared notes. And when they realized what was happening, it only made them more committed to staying together. The front office tried to paint them as greedy and selfish in the press. But Koufax refused to sign unless Drysdale was treated fairly. Drysdale refused to sign unless Koufax was satisfied. They held together for 32 days and eventually secured the highest one-year salaries in the history of the sport to that point. That act of solidarity sent a message to every player in baseball that changed the game forever. When Drysdale passed away suddenly from a heart attack in a Montreal hotel room in 1993 at the age of 56, it was Scully who had to tell the world. He did it with what he later described as a broken heart. He said he had never been asked to make an announcement that hurt him as much as that one. He sat behind his microphone and found that for once in his extraordinary career, the words did not come easily. Because this was not just a player. This was a man Scully had watched and known and loved for decades. A man who had laughed with him and competed in front of him and stood as one of the clearest symbols of what the game could be when it was played with full heart and full commitment. Scully knew what Koufax knew, that the terrifying pitcher who sent Willie Mays into the dirt twice in one at-bat was the same man who carried a cassette tape of Robert F. Kennedy's final speech with him because Kennedy had acknowledged Drysdale's scoreless streak on the very night he was assassinated. That sensitivity, that emotional depth, that quiet humanity was the side of Drysdale that the hitters eventually discovered once the game was over. Willie Mays discovered it. Hank Aaron discovered it. Frank Robinson discovered it. Roberto Clemente discovered it. They loved Don Drysdale because they understood something that most people watching from the outside missed completely. His meanness was not a character flaw. It was a professional commitment. It was loyalty to his teammates, expressed in the only language that the game fully respected. It was Maury Wills stealing his way to the 1962 MVP because no opposing pitcher dared to throw at him with Big D in that dugout. It was Don Sutton joining the Dodgers as a young rookie in 1966, watching Drysdale pitch 300 innings a year and building an entire Hall of Fame career on the work ethic and durability he learned by standing next to that man every single day. Sutton would later say he could never match Koufax's pure talent, but he believed he could match Drysdale's commitment, and 324 career wins later, Sutton proved he was right. It was Sandy Koufax, the most dominant pitcher in the game, freely acknowledging that he could only reach those levels because Don Drysdale was there to anchor the other half of the rotation, take the ball every fourth day without complaint, and handle the part of the game that Koufax did not have to, because Drysdale did it for him. The greatest hitters in baseball history loved Don Drysdale because they were the ones who understood him best. They faced him at his most intense. They felt his most uncompromising competitive fire directed at them personally. And they came away from that experience not with hatred or bitterness, but with something closer to gratitude. Gratitude for a man who told the truth on the mound. Gratitude for a man who respected them enough to treat every at-bat like a war. Gratitude for a man who was, underneath the sidearm delivery and the knockdown pitches and the 2-for-1 policy, one of the most decent and loyal human beings the sport ever produced. And here is the thing that ties all of it together. The love from the hitters, and the love from the teammates, and the love from Vin Scully and Sandy Koufax all came from the same source. It came from the fact that Don Drysdale was exactly who he appeared to be. Every single day. On the mound and off it, in the clubhouse and on the banquet circuit, in the middle of a pennant race and in the quiet of an off-season handshake with a rival. There was no gap between the man people saw and the man who existed when no one was watching. That kind of consistency is rare. That kind of integrity is rare. And the greatest players in the world, who spent their careers reading people and reading pitchers and figuring out who was real and who was performing, they could feel it immediately when they faced him. Don Drysdale was real. And real is something you respect forever. Talent makes winners, Koufax said. But talent with a lot of heart makes legends. Don Drysdale was a legend. If you loved this story, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling us which player's reaction surprised you the most. The conversation in the comments is always worth reading, and there are a lot more stories like this one coming. Do not miss them.